Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. In today's Everything Music, we're going to be talking about the whole tone scale. This is part of my 5-minute scale series where we go through every scale from the major, melodic minor, harmonic minor, and all the auxiliary scales. But today's episode, we're going to focus on the whole tone scale. Now, I've done many episodes up until now, and I've talked, I don't think at all about the whole tone scale. And the whole tone scale is one of the most common scales used. You hear it a lot in people's film scoring. It really came to prominence during the impressionistic era with composers Debussy, Ravel, but you hear it in jazz, you hear it in many different styles of music. Now, a couple things to understand about the whole tone scale is that number one, it is a 6-note scale. Number two, there's no half steps in it. That's why it's called the whole tone scale, because it's made up of only whole steps. Now, there are only 2 whole tone scales. There's a C whole tone and there's D flat whole tone, and that's it, because D whole tone is the same as C. It's all the same notes. They have different names enharmonically just because of how they fall in the scale, but they're all the same notes. So there's only 2 that you need to know. So on the piano, there's 2 fingerings, and on the guitar there's 1 fingering that you move up or down a half step. Okay, so let's talk about the scale. We're going to start with C whole tone. The notes in C whole tone are C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, B flat, C. Or you can say C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C. You can call them G flat, A flat, B flat if you'd like. It doesn't really matter as long as you get the sound of the scale. Because it's a symmetrical scale, there's some really cool patterns that you can do on it. There's also chord voicings that you can do that are movable, that are interchangeable. I'll show that when I get to the guitar part of it. But for these purposes, we have these 3 white keys and 3 black keys. So now, that's been used historically to create this kind of otherworldly sound. It's actually, in my personal opinion, is a really overused scale. That's kind of the scale that people that do film scoring, if they really don't have any other options, they kind of rely on things like this. But it's something that you can create some really interesting ideas with. Now, in the scale are augmented chords. So if we take the key of C, we have C augmented, we have D augmented, we have E augmented, F sharp augmented, A flat augmented, and B flat augmented. B flat augmented I want to talk about for a second. It's the only chord I can think of that's a triad that has both a sharp and a flat in it. B flat, D, F sharp. Okay? I can't think of another one. If any of you can, let me know. You could say B flat, augmented major 7th. That doesn't count. I'm talking only about triads. Okay. Now, there are those 6 augmented chords that are found in it, but they're really all the same notes, essentially. There's 2 augmented triads that are just repeated. Okay, so you got C, E, G sharp, and then you have D, F sharp, A sharp. And then they repeat. E, G sharp, C, or E, G sharp, B sharp is what it should be called enharmonically, is the same as C, E, G sharp. They're the same. It's just an inversion. And then A flat, C, E is an inversion of that same chord. So there's 2 augmented triads found in every whole tone scale. Okay. The same goes in the key of D flat. Now we have a D flat, E flat, F, G, A, B, and then it starts over. So this one has 2 black notes and 3 white notes. That too is made up of 2 augmented triads. The first one would be D flat augmented, and the second one is E flat augmented. And every other one that comes in there, F augmented, G augmented, A augmented, B augmented, are simply inversions of those first 2. Okay, so remember, whole tone scales are made up of a series of whole steps. It's a 6-note scale called the symmetrical scale. And each of the two scales, there are only two whole tone scales, and they're made up of two augmented triads. C and D augmented for C whole tone. They have C and D augmented triad. And D flat whole tone has D flat and E flat augmented. That's the easy way to remember it. Okay, let's talk about some harmonic sounds you can get from the scale. If we take C, I've got a woodwind sound, and I orchestrate there would be a typical C augmented chord that would come from that scale. But you can also do, that is a D augmented over C augmented, and then you can reverse them. Really, really beautiful sound. That's a really interesting way of using it, I think, is if you use a harmonic instance of it like that, where you use take those two different triadic structures that are found in there, the two different augmented chords that are a whole step apart. So once again, D augmented here and C augmented there. That's a beautiful sound. So let's say you're coming from something like we're using some interline movement. I could go from a or I go this way. I went C augmented over D flat augmented, which is a really great chord, which is actually from the augmented scale. We're going to talk about that. But then I resolve it to, I move them in opposite directions so that then I have, so my C goes up to D augmented, and my D flat augmented goes down to C augmented by half step, which creates that. So this chord is from the augmented scale, and then you go to the. It's a nice contrast. So that's a really beautiful way to use these as harmonic textures that you can create. You don't have to play them all together. You can simply make a line up. Understanding which augmented chords go with which scale is important and needs to be memorized. And then if we go up a half step to D flat augmented, we have the D flat and E flat augmented chords together. So that would sound like that. Then you start to getting into these kind of impressionistic era sounds. You know, I think when I hear these chords like that, it just sounds like that era. Let's talk about some lines using the whole tone scale. Okay, now let's talk about some lines out of the whole tone scale. On the guitar, very easy scale to play. Simply wherever you are. Let's say I start in F sharp here. I play it's all whole steps. So move up a tritone, play the same fingering. Move up a tritone, play the same fingering. Up a tritone, play the same fingering. Then you have to deal with the B string. But you can go up some really cool patterns. You can play some odd groupings. Now let's listen to that over a C augmented chord. So on the guitar, it's really easy to play whole tone. You can really take advantage on the B and G strings of. Those are really easy patterns to play. Then you have your augmented triads. I did a little turnaround. That sounds really cool over an augmented chord like this. There's some other cool patterns you can play, like this. What am I doing there? really simple. Things like that. Try and find these kind of interesting groupings with some string skippings. There's a really cool Holdsworth lick that he plays. I'm trying to think of what record it's on. Really hard to play. That's the lick. Kills my hand. If any of you can get that up to tempo, that's a really cool pattern you can play in it. That's all for now. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. I'm Rick Beato.